Hey, Deanna, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Preston.
I just realized that yesterday's agenda did not make it onto the blog, so today's going to be like a two for one. But did you see the notes about book returns and grades and all that stuff?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay.
We return like all the books that we have from school, right? Like from all the classes?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And if that schedule doesn't work for you for whatever reason, if your parents are busy, then I'm sure the school can work something out. That's just the ideal scenario.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, Destiny,
Hi,
how are you today?
I'm alright. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Hello, Lily.
Hello.
Hey, I've been looking forward to talking to you because yesterday I told everybody about two ideas for the Surviving with Class book. And
Yeah.
one idea is interviewing a parent or grandparent and just
Yeah.
recording them, and you can send it to me and I'll transcribe it.
Okay.
And the second is artwork. So if you're still painting and you want to contribute anything, it would be awesome, and we can include it too.
Wait, what about painting?
We were talking about including artwork in the book, and I remembered in that first week you were painting.
Oh yeah, right now I'm actually painting.
Oh, you're kidding. How funny.
Yeah, let me flip the camera. It's a painting for my grandma.
Oh my God, you're
Let's
good.
see. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're doing that all freehand?
Yeah, I sketched it out. This is the original picture. I don't know if you can see it, but
Wow. Yeah.
yeah,
You know,
that's
it's
what I've been working on.
I would have found a way to be positive even if it wasn't good, but that's really good.
Thank you.
So at any rate, if there's anything that you'd like to contribute graphically, artistically, then by all means, feel free to do that too.
All right, that sounds good.
Hey, Emma, we missed you on the Sneeches yesterday. Where were you? Emma, can you hear me?
Wait, what was the question? I couldn't hear you right the first time.
We missed you for the younger siblings Dr. Seuss time yesterday afternoon.
Yesterday was one of those days that they did not want to cooperate.
Oh no.
Yeah, like I don't know if you heard right now, he's yelling already.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Well, shoot. Okay, well maybe next week.
yeah, maybe.
Or maybe just bring him to we'll just call it the zoo and then we'll see if we can figure it out with him on the line.
Yeah, it's hard to get him to sit down. He doesn't really listen to me. He listens more to my sister.
Ah, well, I guess it depends on who's holding the snacks.
Yeah, maybe that will work. I'll try that.
Okay. So since I just realized this morning that the agenda and yesterday's meetings got stuck in drafts and I need to repost that today, the writing prompt that I had for yesterday's reading had to do with the fact that as we started this book, it really seems like you have this super serious big topic, war. And it's one of those things that countless novels, hundreds of movies, hundreds of TV shows always portray soldiers in the same way. You know, like, oh, go on without me. Super noble, super courageous, super brave, super honorable. The characters in this book are none of those things. So, can somebody who was here yesterday sum up for Emma why that is? Why did the author treat these characters with such a different tone?
Is it because he wanted to change like the image of like war? Like, because I know it's satire, or isn't that what you said?
Yes, that's
Satire.
exactly right.
Okay. But like, as to why I feel like he was just trying to change like the image of like what it is, and like just kind of like I don't know, like because I feel like everyone says like everyone praises like the war heroes and everything, and then like him changing this idealistic like war hero into like something that's more human, I guess, and more kind of the opposite, like satire, is kind of like he wants to change everyone's perspective on like war in general.
That's a brilliant answer. I couldn't have made it better myself. We talked about how satire is the use of humor in a biting way. It's almost like anger and resentment, but channeled into humor, kind of like sarcasm, but with a purpose. And the purpose here is to criticize something and draw our attention to what's wrong with it so that we can improve it. And when he treats these characters in this way and describes them as trying to pick up on the nurses or get out of their jobs or just torturing each other and teasing each other for fun, on one hand, it actually seems a little bit more authentic. But on the other, it also gives us the idea and the title of this book. Remember, we talked about the catch-22 as being that impossible dilemma. So that, like, if you were crazy, then you could go to school during a pandemic. But you wouldn't be allowed into school because you'd be crazy. So you want to act crazy so you wouldn't have to go to school. But if you were sane enough to act crazy and try and get out of going to school, they catch you for being sane and they make you go to school. Like, it's an impossible circle. So in that environment, you can imagine all these guys are basically just trying to stay alive. And I didn't put a bookmark in, so bear with me one quick second while I figure out where we left off. And so Yossarian was the main character, right? He's our protagonist. And he was the one that was cutting the parts out of the letters so that they wouldn't give away the secrets. And the chaplain is sort of a sympathetic character to him. And so I'm on page 12, which if you're following along on that PDF, you can kind of sort your way down there. The paragraph starts with, the chaplain arrived the day after the fire. Yossarian was busy expurgating all but romance words from the letters when the chaplain sat down in a chair between the beds and asked him how he was feeling. He had placed himself a bit to one side, and the captain's bars on the tab of his shirt collar were all the insignia Yossarian could see. Yossarian had no idea who he was and just took it for granted that he was either another doctor or another madman. Oh, pretty good, he answered. I've got a slight pain in my liver, and I haven't been the most regular of fellows, I guess. But all in all, I must admit that I feel pretty good. That's good, said the chaplain. Yes, Yossarian said. Yes, that is good. I meant to come around sooner, the chaplain said, but I really haven't been well. That's too bad, Yossarian said. Just a head cold, the chaplain added quickly. I've got a fever of 101, Yossarian added just as quickly. That's too bad, said the chaplain. Yes, Yossarian agreed. Yes, that is too bad. Why do you think this conversation is so boring?
Because it is. They're just like, oh, that's too bad. Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. Like, they're just saying the same things over again.
Yeah, this is hardly like the dramatic stuff of Marvel Comics here, right? So why do you think the author includes dialogue that's that mundane, ordinary? Any guesses?
I want to say just like going back to his like original point of like, because you know, like everyone's like, oh, these heroes are always talking about dangerous missions and stuff like that and everything they had to go through. And this one's like, oh, I'm sick. Oh, that's too bad. Oh, I'm sick. That's too bad. Like, that's, I don't know, just kind of just displaying them in like his light of like seeing them as not as heroic as everyone thinks they are.
Yes. Now, everyone on this call is actually, as I think, is going to be taking the AP exam. So one thing I want to point out is as a reminder, everything that you see in a text is there on purpose. Every word, every letter, every punctuation mark is something that the author intended. So I want you to treat it with suspicion. I want you to like raise an eyebrow and kind of ask yourself, like, what are you doing here? And if the dialogue is like this, I think, Deanna, you're absolutely on the right track. The author's establishing a tone toward this where he's trying to portray this as just a real conversation between two guys that we're listening in on. Remember that the narrator isn't a character like it is in The Great Gatsby. Here, the narrator is that omniscient, that all-knowing third-person voice. So it's almost as if we're just kind of peering in from the outside and these two guys aren't aware of us being there and they're just doing their thing. The chaplain fidgeted. Is there anything I can do for you? He asked after a while. No. Yossarian sighed. The doctors are doing all that's humanly possible, I suppose. No, the chaplain colored faintly. I didn't mean anything like that. I meant cigarettes or books or Toys. No, no, Yossarian said. Thank you. I have everything I need, I suppose. Everything but good health. That's too bad. Yes, Yossarian said. Yes, that is too bad. The chaplain stirred again. He looked from side to side a few times, then gazed up at the ceiling, then down at the floor. He drew a deep breath. Lieutenant Nately sends his regards, he said. Yossarian was sorry to hear they had a mutual friend. It seemed that there was a basis to their conversation after all. Now, in his mind, Yossarian is like, sorry to hear they have a mutual friend? Yeah, because he's trying to get rid of them. He doesn't want a reason for them to have something in common that they might actually talk about at more length. Lieutenant Nately sends his regards. I know Lieutenant Nately quite well. He's a bit loony, isn't he? The chaplain's smile was embarrassed. I'm afraid I couldn't say. I don't think I know him that well. You can take my word for it, Yossarian said. He's as goofy as they come. The chaplain weighed the next silence heavily and then shattered it with an abrupt question. You are Captain Yossarian, aren't you? Nately had a bad start. He came from a good family. Please excuse me, the chaplain persisted timorously. I may be committing a very grave error. Are you Captain Yossarian? Yes, Captain Yossarian confessed. I am Captain Yossarian. Of the 256th Squadron? Of the fighting 256th Squadron, Yossarian replied. I didn't know there were any other Captain Yossarians. As far as I know, I'm the only Captain Yossarian I know, but that's only as far as I know. I see, the chaplain said unhappily. That's 2 to the fighting 8th power, Yossarian pointed out, if you're thinking of writing a symbolic poem about our squadron. No, mumbled the chaplain, I'm not thinking of writing a symbolic poem about your squadron. Yossarian straightened sharply when he spied the tiny silver cross on the other side of the chaplain's collar. He was thoroughly astonished, for he had never really talked with a chaplain before. You're a chaplain, he exclaimed ecstatically. I didn't know you were a chaplain. Why, yes, the chaplain answered. Didn't you know I was a chaplain? Why, no, I didn't know you were a chaplain. Now, this back and forth repetitive thing is something we're going to see a lot of in the book, but there's a reason for that. So far, these two haven't misunderstood each other. But as you'll see in the dialogue to come, a lot of the humor in this book comes from miscommunication between the characters. And a lot of the time when you think about life, a lot of communication gets skewed and misunderstood between people. Sometimes that's hard and it creates conflict, but sometimes it's just out and out funny. And especially if one person like Yossarian starts manipulating it, as we'll see in the book, the author has his fun with it. The chaplain flushed again and gazed down at his hands. He was a slight man of about 32, with tan hair and brown, diffident eyes. His face was narrow and rather pale. An innocent nest of ancient pimple pricks lay in the basin of each cheek. Yossarian wanted to help him. Can I do anything at all to help you? The chaplain asked. Yossarian shook his head, still grinning. No, I'm sorry. I have everything I need and I'm quite comfortable. In fact, I'm not even sick. That's good. As soon as the chaplain said the words, he was sorry and shoved his knuckles into his mouth with a giggle of alarm. But Yossarian remained silent and disappointed him. Why did the chaplain giggle? I went over it quickly, but what did Yossarian just admit?
He's not sick.
Yeah, he's not even sick. So by Army regulations, the chaplain should be upset and even turning him in. There are other men in the group I must visit, he apologized finally. I'll come to see you again, probably tomorrow. Please do that, Yossarian said. I'll come only if you want me to, the chaplain said, lowering his head shyly. I've noticed that I make many of the men uncomfortable. Yossarian glowed with affection. I want you to, he said. You won't make me uncomfortable. The chaplain beamed gratefully and then peered down at a slip of paper he had been concealing in his hand all the while. He counted along the beds in the ward, moving his lips, and then centered his attention dubiously on Dunbar. May I inquire, he whispered softly, is Lieutenant Dunbar? Yes, Yossarian answered loudly. That is Lieutenant Dunbar. Thank you, the chaplain whispered. Thank you very much. I must visit with him. I must visit with every member of the group who is in the hospital. Even those in the other wards? Yossarian asked. Even those in the other wards. Be careful in those other wards, Father, Yossarian warned. That's where they keep the mental cases. They're filled with lunatics. It isn't necessary to call me Father, the chaplain exclaimed. I'm an Anabaptist. I'm dead serious about those other wards, Yossarian continued grimly. MPs won't protect you because they're craziest of all. I'd go with you myself, but I'm scared stiff. Insanity is contagious. This is the only sane ward in the whole hospital. Everybody is crazy but us. This is probably the only sane ward in the whole world, for that matter. The chaplain rose quickly and edged away from Yossarian's bed, and then nodded with a conciliating smile and promised to conduct himself with appropriate caution. And now I must visit with Lieutenant Dunbar, he said. Still, he lingered, remorsefully. How is Lieutenant Dunbar, he asked, at last. As good as they go, Yossarian assured him. A true prince, one of the finest, least dedicated men in the whole world. Now, here we've got something specific. This is a literary technique that we've talked about before when we were in the before times when we were in class together. What is it when a character says something that's implying the opposite of what he should be or what would be appropriate in the moment? He says he's one of the finest, least dedicated men in the whole world. Shouldn't that be one of the finest, most dedicated men?
It should be, but it's not.
Yeah, so what is he doing on purpose? What is that when we say one thing, but it's got a funny effect because it's the opposite of what the audience is expecting?
Is that irony?
Yes, love it. I feel like I've taught something this year. Hooray! All right, so now the next question is, in this context, why is least dedicated a good thing? To Yossarian, at least. So if the most dedicated would ordinarily be a good thing, it would be because the cause is honorable or the organization has integrity and the people within it take their responsibilities seriously, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you think the organization is crap and you're likely to get yourself killed or hurt or sick if you do what's expected, then suddenly being the least dedicated sounds like a pretty good thing to you.
That's true.
So now we start to see how the author's attitude towards the bigger topic here influences his use of dialogues and the little techniques like humor and irony. I didn't mean that, the chaplain answered, whispering again. Is he very sick? No, he isn't sick. In fact, he isn't sick at all. That's good. The chaplain sighed with relief. Yes, Yossarian said. Yes, that is good. A chaplain, Dunbar said when the chaplain had visited him and gone. Did you see that? A chaplain. Wasn't he sweet? Said Yossarian. Maybe they should give him 3 votes. Who's they? Dunbar demanded suspiciously. In a bed in the small private section at the end of the ward, always working ceaselessly behind the green plyboard partition, was the solemn middle-aged colonel who was visited every day by a gentle, sweet-faced woman with curly ash blonde hair, who was not a nurse and not a whack and not a Red Cross girl, but nevertheless appeared faithfully at the hospital in Pianosa every afternoon, wearing a pretty pastel summer dress that was very smart and white leather pumps with heels half high at the base of nylon seams that were inevitably straight. The colonel was in communications, and he was kept busy day and night transmitting glutinous messages from the interior into square pads of gauze, which he sealed meticulously, and delivered to a covered white pail that stood on the night table beside his bed. The colonel was gorgeous. He had a cavernous mouth, cavernous cheeks, cavernous, sad, mildewed eyes. His face was the color of clouded silver. He coughed quietly, gingerly, and dabbed the pad slowly at his lips with a distaste that had become automatic. The colonel dwelt in a vortex of specialists who were still specializing in trying to determine what was troubling him. They hurled lights in his eyes to see if he could see, rammed needles into nerves to hear if he could feel. There was a urologist for his urine, a lymphologist for his lymph, an endocrinologist for his endocrines, a psychologist for his psyche, a dermatologist for his derma. There was a pathologist for his pathos, which makes no sense whatsoever, a cystologist for his cysts, and a bald and pedantic cytologist from the zoology department at Harvard, who had been shanghaied ruthlessly into the medical corps by a faulty anode in an IBM machine and spent his sessions with a dying colonel trying to discuss Moby Dick with him. Now, that probably went over your heads, but that's a ridiculously absurd and hilarious sentence. I want to go back to the word cetologist and point out that he was from the zoology department. Do you know what a cetologist is? You know what a cetacean is?
No.
It's a whale. A cetologist is an expert in the study of whales. He was only there because a computer made a mistake. And the reason that he was talking about Moby Dick with the Colonel is that Moby Dick is a novel about a guess what?
A whale.
Ding, ding, ding. So now we have tiptoed into the ridiculous. The Colonel had really been investigated. There was not an organ of his body that had not been drugged and derogated, dusted and dredged, fingered and photographed, removed, plundered, and replaced. Neat, slender, and erect, the woman touched him often as she sat by his bedside and was the epitome of stately sorrow each time she smiled. The Colonel was tall, thin, and stooped. When he rose to walk, he bent forward even more, making a deep cavity of his body, and placed his feet down very carefully, moving ahead by inches from the knees down. There were violet pools under his eyes. The woman spoke softly, softer even than the Colonel coughed, and none of the men in the ward ever heard her voice. In less than 10 days, the Texan cleared the ward. The artillery captain broke first, and after that, the exodus started. Dunbar, Yossarian, and the fighter captain all bolted the same morning. Dunbar stopped having dizzy spells, and the fighter captain blew his nose. Yossarian told the doctor that the pain in his liver had gone away. It was as easy as that. Even the warrant officer fled. In less than 10 days, the Texan drove everybody in the ward back to duty. Everybody but the CID man, who had caught cold from the fighter captain and come down with pneumonia. So basically, the Texan annoyed people so much that they would rather go back to battle and risk their lives than stick around in the hospital anymore. And the only person who got actually sick was the investigator who came to find out who was destroying all the letters, and he wound up getting pneumonia. Now, is anybody following? I'm curious, while I'm reading, is anybody following with the text on the course blog?
I am.
Okay. So you see I left off where it says part 2, Clevenger?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I'm wondering is, because I'm concerned about making sure that we finish, if I can ask you guys to read, and I'm wondering what would be realistic over the weekend. Would it be part 2, part 3? Why don't you scroll down and tell me what you think would be a good place for us to touch in on Monday?
I think part 3, like we read part 2 on our own and we come together back on part 3 would be good.
Okay, does that work for everybody else?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Is everybody a reasonably happy camper heading into the weekend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to say yes, but I'm
Sure.
glad if you are.
Sure.
Just to recap, in case you joined us a couple minutes late, Lena, if you haven't seen it yet, I posted an item on the course blog about grading. Also, if you have a friend that has not been able to join us, I know some people have been keeping up on their blogs, but they haven't been on the calls. Please encourage them to send in chapters or pieces or whatever for the book. And please have them read the grading policy so that anybody who wants to get to me over the course of May can. And otherwise, I will see you on Monday for the Stirring Chapter 1, Part 3. If you're in the AP call with us at 2 o'clock, we're going to touch in on rhetorical analysis and just make sure you guys have some notes and another practice prompt. And have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.